Hello and welcome to Pagabo Live, our initiative designed to promote knowledge in the public sector. I'm Tom, and over the next hour, we'll be talking about decarbonising the public sector estate with our panel of industry experts. Jake, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi everyone, I'm Jake Dowling. I'm the Building Services Manager and Decarbonisation Lead for Property Services at Seven Construction. Very brief overview of my role. I support the business and our customers across all compliance-related aspects from pre-construction to aftercare, with a main focus on helping our clients achieve net zero.
Brilliant. Emily?
Hello, Emily Mansfield. I'm Head of Sustainability at Bailey Garner. I've been in sustainability for about 20 years now, and I've mainly dealt with the building physics side of sustainability, so looking at thermal modelling, overheating, and how to reduce those energy demands in our buildings.
And Emily is in a room with light sensors on, so you'll see her moving around from time to time, potentially going dark. Good energy saving there. And over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everybody. Rob Tyler from Bailey Garner. I'm the National Education Sector Lead and an Associate Partner. I work primarily in the education sector, obviously, but responsible for overseeing the strategic direction of that work that we do within that sector in the business, but also aligning that with our work across other non-residential sectors of work.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much to the three of you for joining us, and welcome back to everybody in the audience. We're delighted to be back for a second series of Pagabo Live, starting with this webinar on decarbonisation. Today's event is going to be a Q&A session, so we'll be going through some of the stages of a decarbonisation process, the accreditations and funding that's available, and also some of the common lessons and pitfalls that have been encountered by the team on the webinar today. We'd also love it if you can get involved, so please feel free to ask as many questions as you like using the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. You'll be able to see that on your browser just along the bottom on the Zoom menu. And a little bit of brand new news for 2025 is our very own accreditation. Pagabo Live is now CPD accredited, and you'll be sent a link at the end of this event to claim your CPD credit. Exciting times for everyone concerned. So we've got the first poll question here, as we like to start on Pagabo Live with finding out where your level of knowledge is. So for the audience today, the poll question is, how aware are you of the decarbonisation process for public sector estates? There's a rating of 1 to 4, 1 being not very aware and 4 being very aware. If we could just give another 10 seconds on that, please. And if we could close that poll now, please. And looking at the results, we're kind of in that middle ground of people in that 2 to 3 of being sort of not particularly aware. So that's a good amount of people that hopefully we'll get to learn a little bit today, and we'll get to see those numbers move in the right direction across the session. So to kick off, it'd be good to get an understanding on those sort of first steps of the decarbonisation journey. So what are the first steps public sector clients should take when beginning their decarbonisation journey? And we'll start with you on this one, Jake.
I think for me, the most critical step is understanding the why. Understanding what the reason is for embarking on that journey to net zero. Often when we sit down with some of our customers and clients, there's a net zero target of 2030, 2035. Some are much more ambitious than that, but they don't truly understand why they're on that journey or what is needed to get there. And it's really hard to guide a client through that journey without understanding what their driver is, because there's several different strategies, to help them achieve that. So yeah, I think that's the critical one for me. And in added to that, I think it's then selecting the right partner to take you on that journey.
Excellent. Thank you very much on that one. Jake, we'll go to you on this one next. Emily, please.
Thank you. So I think for me, it's really like for you to understand your building stock. So when we talk about decarbonisation, we shouldn't really just focus on the actual building energy use, but also the building users as well, because how they feel in the building can change how they operate it. So if they're fairly cold, they might turn up the heat. If they're fairly too hot in the summer, they might turn up the cooling. Is there too much light or too little light, like I have today, too little light? But yeah, so that I think understanding your stock and the building users is probably a good place to start, and then mapping out your buildings. Like, have you got existing data? Have you got display energy certificates, EPCs for your buildings? And if you haven't, it's undertaking them to understand where those key high energy use buildings are, and then maybe targeting them initially before moving on to the ones that are better performing.
Excellent. And Rob, anything specifically from your experience that you think are notable kind of first steps that should be taken?
Yeah, a couple of points just to add to what the guys have said, really. One around the appointment of your project team early in the process, understanding and knowing your expertise internally as an organisation and where you need that support at an early stage is really crucial. That those kind of experts and people with the knowledge are on board to the scheme early. And I think secondly is making sure that you know what your wider strategy is. And vision for your estate, so that any of the decarbonisation works that you embark on align with that. I think that's really important to make sure that it's not looked at in isolation, but considered across all of your stock, and how you're looking to improve those over their building lives.
Yeah, we'll come back to that early engagement and kind of collaboration a point a little bit later on because it is very, very important. So let's move on to now the stages of the process. And in fact, we'll go to you back on this one on Rob to start with this. So the typical stages of planning for a decarbonisation project, what are they kind of from that initial planning to implementation, then the management as well?
Yeah, I think the first, just an example of each of those and a couple of key points. First is the initial scoping and that survey stage. That's really important. Making sure that we have undertaken suitably developed investigations into the building, so we know the construction, we know the building type, and we know what those opportunities look like in terms of how we can improve the performance of the buildings. And again, looking at it holistically, looking at a kind of whole building or a fabric first approach to that, to minimise the demand and the need on those more active mechanical or electrical measures. So I think that's really important in that really early stage of implementation. And I think into the management, it's important to think about the practical delivery of the projects, understanding the site or sites that the works will apply to, how the disruption may be managed. These works typically involve, internal wall insulation and lighting replacement and heating system upgrades. They're very, very intrusive works, which have a very big benefit, but at the same time, if not carefully managed, can cause real challenges around the operation of buildings. So it's really important to think about access to the buildings, minimizing disruption, and any potential phasing or approach to the works to best deliver to meet your needs.
And Jake, from your perspective, any notes on the those typical sort of stages of the process?
I think he very much echoes Rob's first point. The first step for us is to analyse the building. It's that key assessment stage, gathering all the correct information, understanding the building stock, the composition, condition, and building the right survey condition information to understand what is needed for the correct strategy for that building. From that, then you can go on to optimize the building. So just by, as Emily's touched on before, user habits, is the room too hot? Is it too cold? Is there enough light or not? Just by educating the occupants, you can actually optimize the building without changing the systems and improve the energy efficiency that way. And then you can go on to, traditionally decarbonising and changing out your systems from there.
Yeah, and Emily, anything further from you on this one?
Yeah, I think from like a sustainability consultant perspective, it's like that early engagement with the client, the building users, having workshops with the team throughout the whole process. So as we build up the energy model, we'd build one for the existing building, one for the proposals to demonstrate those energy saving measures that we're putting in place, but also assess it against the thermal comfort as well, to take that holistic approach and make sure that we're not adding insulation and better performing glazing and then causing an overheating issue or something like that. So it's basically continuing the modelling throughout the whole process and keeping the communication and coordination going with within the team.
I think it's always a good kind of overview there of some of the early stages and understanding those first steps of getting into that decarbonisation journey. So, audience poll now, if you could open that up, please. What is the biggest barrier for your organisation starting that decarbonisation process? Is it a lack of funding, lack of knowledge, resistance to change, complexity of existing estates, or anything else? We've got the chat box as well at the bottom of the screen if you'd like to do that, or potentially put it in as a question, which we can put to our panel at the end of today's session. So what are your biggest barriers? Is it lack of funding, lack of knowledge, resistance to change, or the complexity of existing estates, or any other potential issues there? Just have 5 more seconds on that poll, please, before closing it off. Brilliant. So quite interesting, and we'll go on to funding as well in a few moments. But around 50% of those responded said that lack of funding is the biggest issue, followed on by complexity of existing estates. The good news is lack of knowledge and resistance to change, only 10 and 8% respectively there. So there's clearly the knowledge there to do it. There's clearly the willingness to change, but potentially not quite sure around the complexity within the estate, and also a lack of funding that's out there. So we'll move on to talk about accreditations now. So PAS 2038 is mentioned specifically here, but we can talk about all accreditations. Are they beneficial? Are they worthwhile? We'll come to you first on this one, Emily, please.
Thank you, Tom. I think they're beneficial because they provide a structure to your approach and the methodology behind it, and it also kind of sets out a consistency across the industry as well, to make sure that we're all doing the same, assessing against the same methodology. So we're not just saying, oh, my building is better because I've done X, Y, Z, but actually compared to another building that's done the same measures, it's performing as well. So you're setting out a methodology that's comparable across the industry. And it also takes, like, especially PAS 2038, it takes that holistic approach as well. So it's looking at the balance between the costs, benefits, carbon savings, and the energy efficiency improvements, while considering the occupants and the building itself, as I said back at the beginning. And also another benefit from them is the quality assurance, because they require that specialist to be on board, engaged at the very early stage, a bit like what Rob was saying in the previous question, doing those surveys, seeing what's achievable. So I think they're beneficial from that aspect, definitely.
And from your perspective, Rob, is that tally with your experience that they are kind of beneficial and worthwhile? Oh, we seem to have lost your sound there, Rob, somehow.
Apologies, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yep.
Apologies. Yeah, I think so. I agree with what Emily said. I think there was a question, Tom, that someone's raised about what is PAS 2038. So I think just to touch on that, that's the standard in essence to see energy improvements on the existing building stock, and identifies a number of key roles in delivering that effectively. So it's a set of guidelines for the retrofit of commercial buildings, and explains those different roles and processes. So it's really important. I think what it gives us is it gives the whole retrofit process a bit more teeth in the non-residential sector, and it gives the opportunity to have a real clear framework of what we expect people to do and how we expect people to deliver these projects. I think by adopting something like that, which is still relatively, say, unknown to a lot of organisations, it's an opportunity to show some kind of leadership as well from the front in showing a real demonstration of enhancing the push forward to sustainability and addressing the climate action need. So it's a great opportunity for people to have that clear metric to follow and that clear set of standards to make sure we do things in the right way.
And Jake, from a sort of construction side, from Seven's perspective, are these accreditations worthwhile? Are they a challenge to work towards? What's your experience of it?
Yes, 100%. They're definitely worthwhile. But in the same sentence, yes, they're also a challenge. Especially with PAS 2038, it is, as Rob said, it's very much in its infancy at present. but it does provide that consistency approach, and as Emily and Rob both said, it takes that whole building, whole life model approach. It very much focuses on early engagement, early assessment, and it looks at building as interconnected systems. You know, as we've touched on before, it looks at the services, it looks at the building fabric, it looks at the occupants, and you know how the building is used and intended to be used. It promotes digital twin modeling and simulation as well, which helps you to minimize the performance gap post completion. So through Pareto analysis and dynamic simulation, you can predict and you can preempt some of the variables that are unknown at that design assessment stage, and you've got a more robust design and strategy for the building.
Yeah, it kind of rolls quite interestingly into our next point about funding, and certainly the results of the poll. 49% of attendees saying that funding was a particular challenge for them. So with those public sector budgets being stretched, as we all know they are, funding is a massive challenge. What is the sort of PSDS funding, and how can public sector clients make the most out of it? How can it be accessed? We'll go to you first in this one, Jake.
Well, for people who aren't aware, it's a public sector decarbonisation scheme. It provides funding, for the replacement of end-of-life systems with essentially renewable technologies. I think the first 3 phases were very much first come, first serve, and although there is a clarification and a competency review, it wasn't as robust as it is now. They've changed for phase 4 that it's now based on, I think it's pence per grams of carbon matrix, essentially. How effective are the improvement measures that you're implementing? So again, when we touch on the previous question of looking at standards, particularly aligned to past 2038, through doing that early assessment and that digital modelling, you've got a robust plan of how that building will actually perform on completion.
Excellent. And Rob, I know you'll probably have plenty to say on this one, so feel free to share your experience and knowledge on this one.
Yeah, I think as Jake says, it was a welcomed change this time around to go from the first come first serve of how quickly can people click buttons on a laptop to actually being based on the carbon saving, which is really good. So it now takes into account, as Jake says, the impact and the effectiveness of those measures that are being proposed. So that it can cover various types of projects as well. So insulating the building, heating upgrades, as we mentioned. So as Jake says, changing to a renewable source, or change into a low carbon measure such as heat pumps, solar panels, and other renewable technologies. I think the really important thing in terms of making the most of that in the public sector is having what Salix call a whole building approach, or a fabric first approach, as we probably know more commonly, and being really aware of what your stock is, knowing your building, knowing your stock, and really knowing exactly what it is that you can do in terms of those improvements to your buildings. And I think it's important that it does follow and align with wider kind of strategic objectives, which I might have mentioned earlier on. We shouldn't be doing this in isolation. It should be part of a wider strategy across building stock to see the best performance of those buildings, and of course hopefully save money in the long run. So I think just a key part there in terms of the making the most of it, I think an upfront heat decarbonisation plan is an absolute must. That's something that Emily's got experience in. From our side of really just, that's your base understanding of your buildings, of your stock, to know what we can physically do. That will generate then the digital twin and the IES model that I think Emily or Jake mentioned earlier, to really understand, okay, if we do scenarios A and B, what does that do? If we change that to A, B, and C, what does that do? And really seek to try and maximize and work out what combination of measures can see the biggest saving and give you the best chance of success.
Thanks, Rob. Really comprehensive that. And Emily, anything to add from your perspective on that?
I think Jake and Rob have covered most of it, but I think it's just emphasising what Rob said at the end there about the heat decarbonisation plan. and the modelling, it's just to get the most out of it. It's making sure that that modelling is accurate as possible, because if you underestimate or overestimate, it can really impact the savings and like lead to disappointment at the end. So again, it goes back to what we said previously. It's that early appointment of the project team, the sustainability consultant, and having those regular workshops as well throughout the process.
Brilliant. It's almost like you've seen the questions and you know what's coming next. But we'll have an audience poll now, just so we can get a bit of an overview and sort of close off that funding side of things. Has your organisation accessed PSDS funding for decarbonisation initiatives? So first, yes, successfully. Second, yes, but we face challenges. Thirdly, no, but we're planning to, and no, and we don't plan to. So it'd be interesting just to get a bit of a temperature check of the room and those public sector organisations that you work for as to whether you'll be accessing those or attempting to access that funding. So just 5 more seconds on that poll, please, before closing. See the results. So interestingly, a fairly even split there. So around a quarter of attendees have said that they've successfully applied for it. 15% have said that they had but faced challenges. 40% have said they haven't yet but are planning to. And interestingly, 22% have said no and they don't plan to. Interesting to see how that marries up with those who responded that don't have or they're struggling to access funding. So interesting views there, and we'll probably go back to that in our audience Q&A a little bit later on, actually, because that's quite an interesting result there. But we'll move on to we talked about collaboration and early engagement. So what role does collaboration play between clients, contractors, and other stakeholders at different stages of that decarbonisation process? And we'll go to you first on this one, Rob, please. But it'd be good to hear the thoughts of all 3 of you at various points. So yeah, Rob first.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely critical. The just understanding and knowing exactly what it is that we're trying to deliver, how we're going to go about it, and the impact on all those different stakeholders is really, really important. So from defining the brief at the outset through to delivery and handing the building over and making sure people have got the right training and the right documentation in place, I think is really, really, really crucial. It's a real risk with decarbonisation projects that actually if you don't know what your outputs are going to be or what you want those outputs to be, that you run the risk of ending with a product or an end solution of something that doesn't give you the solution you wanted and can create future problems. You know, if we have a system that perhaps is too comprehensive for what we need, if it's quite a simple building, if the controls are rather complicated and don't quite meet the needs of that building and that use, if that's all not discussed and thought about early on and then discussed all the way through the project to make sure that it aligns with that initial brief, that can make real challenges further down the line. So that collaboration piece is really, really important from start to end.
And Emily, it's something you mentioned in your response to the previous question, that collaboration and early engagement. So how important is it? This is the chance to bang the drum for collaboration.
Oh, it's key. It's very key. I think especially in more complex buildings, it's the building owners, users, sorry, and also the maintenance team as well, understanding what's being proposed and how to operate that building, but also maintain it going forward. Because some of these technologies we're not overly familiar with, like in operation. So it's making sure that they do understand how to use it, maintain it and control it. Like it's not like a gas boiler where you can switch it on and off. They're slow, like low grade heat. So you need to have the heat pump running for longer hours to heat up to like the right temperature. So it's making sure that they understand how they're using it. So I'd say that the collaboration between those parties is key throughout all stages really of that process.
And Jake, from a contractor's viewpoint, I guess the key is not just collaboration on the client side, but also collaboration with those on-site and supply chain and all the suppliers involved in the process.
Yeah, 100%. When you look at a decarbonisation project, and I suppose it comes back to the first question of, you know, why are we doing this and what are the drivers? But without, you know, we've touched on renewable technologies, the aftercare of them, the maintenance. They do involve specialists, you know, installers, specialist maintenance engineers. I've worked with some very competent building managers, and for them to, understand and take on the responsibility of the renewable technologies, it's not the right strategy. So by involving the right partners, and again, it comes back to what Rob said earlier about understanding the capabilities of your project team, but by building them relationships with, the right people and the right partners, you can influence design, you can influence the outputs, and you can manage expectations, client scope and brief. As I say, it comes back to minimizing the performance gap. Everybody's seen the horror stories of the renewable technologies that have been installed, left uncommissioned because, it's the incorrect design or it's the incorrect strategy for that building, type or use.
Yeah, it's a really as you said, there are a few horror stories out there around that, so it's just a case of making sure that everyone knows their role in the process. We'll move on to now talking about asset management, because this is obviously very important as part of the overall strategy and the balance between asset management strategy and funding as well. So how important is it to have a robust asset management strategy for successfully decarbonising estates? We'll stay with you on this one, Jake, to start off with.
I think it's very simple. You can't manage what you don't know, in very simple terms. And whether it's a single building or whether it's multiple buildings, to get the right strategy, you need to understand what makes up that building, what the condition is of them. It can be a multitude of factors. A lot of time people looking at a decarbonisation scheme, they go straight to energy efficiency. As we say, air source heat pump for gas, for example, but it's not always the right strategy. So understanding the age and condition of the plant, you can actually decarbonise your estate just by following, asset and end of life cycle management efficiently.
Rob, we'll come to you next on this one. Your views on asset management strategies and their role in making sure we're successfully decarbonising these estates.
What Jake said there was perfect, really, in terms of you need to know what you've got before you can do any work to it, really. It's as simple as that. I think you need to know what you've got, what condition it's in, to enable you to know what your options are moving forward. And I think it's important to make sure that plan considers obviously prioritisation and planning. Any decarbonisation scheme will typically involve multiple projects, so I think having that robust strategy can help to prioritise efforts on key things around costs, the impact, the feasibility of physically delivering the work, and also look at the life cycle management of assets as well, by integrating any decarb works into that life cycle, making more informed choices about upgrading and retrofitting and replacing those assets. So I think it really does all tie in together in the wider strategy and vision of every organisation who's involved in these projects.
And Emily, I can see you nodding along there. Something you agree with clearly.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's very important, and I think I'm not going over what Rob and Jake just said, but also just again go back and understanding the monitoring of those buildings as well, and I think mapping them out really helps with the decarbonisation of buildings, and it's something that we're very familiar with in residential, and why not apply the same thing to non-domestic?
Brilliant stuff. Now we're heading towards the end of our pre-planned questions here, but we're really keen to get as many audience questions in as possible. We've already seen a few coming in, so thank you very much for those. If you joined late and would like to add a question for our Q&A later on, simply open up the Q&A box, should be at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and type your question into there, and we're hoping to get to those in the next 15 minutes or so. But before we do that, we've got a couple more questions and also got our penultimate audience poll. So how confident are you in your organization's ability to maintain decarbonisation efforts long term? So there's a very confident, a somewhat confident, a not very confident, and a not confident at all option. You'll see we never leave you the option to sit on the fence with these. We always want you to try and put your opinions out there. So how confident are you in your organization's ability to maintain decarbonisation efforts long term? Very confident, somewhat confident, not very confident, or not confident at all. Just have 5 more seconds on that before closing. Excellent. Well, there's a bit of confidence in the room, so that's nice. So, doing a bit of quick maths there, that's 74% of the people that responded to the poll said that they're either very confident or somewhat confident in their organisation's ability to maintain decarbonisation efforts. And on the more negative side, only 6% said not confident at all. So, good news there. There's a fair bit of confidence around that people can and organisations can maintain that decarbonisation strategy into the long term. So we're going to wrap up this section of the webinar by talking about some of the pitfalls and lessons learned. We'll start with pitfalls. So are there any common pitfalls organizations and clients should try and avoid after completing the decarbonisation process? We'll go to you first, and Emily, please.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I think the biggest one is probably losing touch with the building, like handing it over and just say that that's it, it's all done. I think you just got to carry out those post-occupancy evaluations, keep in touch with the building users. How is it performing how they planned it to be? Is there anywhere that where there could be improvements? And that's all kind of aligns with the accreditation as well, like the PAS 2038. It kind of brings that all to a close. So making sure you got that post-occupancy evaluation after a year of completion. But yeah, I think it's falling back into old habits. Is probably the key one. So I think it's just making sure that the right training's in place, so people know how to operate their building. If there's new controls, how they should control their building. I think that's probably the key one for me.
And Rob, any common pitfalls that you've come across and you would think that clients should really try their very best to avoid?
I think something that we mentioned earlier around the training and handover, making sure that's robust. There's far too many occasions where we have clients who are handed over a nice shiny new system, whatever it may be, and don't know how to use it, how to operate it, how to make it work in the best way. So straight away, they're a system that should make your buildings run more efficiently, and potentially, saving money can end up doing the complete opposite if it's not being run in the right way, or maintained in the right way. So I think it's really important that making sure all those files are in place and all that training's been had at the end and before everybody walks away, to leave you to get on with it.
And Jake, same questions to you. Any common pitfalls that clients should be looking to avoid after completing the decarb process?
Yeah, I think Emily and Rob have covered it very well. Again, I suppose for us, it's assuming that everything's complete at the end of the project, and that's the end of your journey. And it's quite the opposite, really, I suppose. Once you've decarbonised your estate, that's really the start of your journey. And neglecting, sort of the maintenance and monitoring of them systems, how they're performing, as we know, building use change, occupants change, but quite often the systems that make up them buildings don't. They just get left to sit there as they've been originally designed and commissioned. And by doing that, you can degrade the performance of that building. So yeah, I think it comes back to the correct knowledge and skills of the people taking over the building, but also I think there's emphasis on the contractor delivering the work to do the right training handover, put in the right maintenance strategy, and educate the client. I think that's key. And as we've said, PAS 2038 has that. It's got the post-occupancy evaluation. Again, you look at PSDS Phase 4, there's now a requirement to write up a 3-year post-occupancy maintenance and monitoring strategy. And that can be as advanced or as basic as it needs to be. But again, it's just making the client aware of them responsibilities of their building post-completion.
Excellent. Well, we'll wrap up this section with the classic lessons learned question. We'll go to you first with this one, Emily, and just go down my screen. What are some of the most important lessons learned from live decarbonisation projects that you've worked on? And some case study examples are always encouraged in this situation. You can anonymise them if you need to.
Fair enough. I think the biggest one for me is going back to the beginning of this session is understanding that client's brief, and then ensuring that the team that you have in the initial part of the process either carry them forward or make sure there's a sufficient information available, so that if a contractor then appoints a different team, different stadium consultant, architect, etc., then there's enough information in that initial start of that process to carry over to the following stage, to ensure that you don't delay program, and that the modelling that's been completed is to a top-notch standard. And it's also going back to that client's brief as well. What are you trying to target? Are you looking at just EPC ratings? Do you go want to make sure your building is EPC rated B, or A? And or are you looking at more detailed modelling? So looking at energy use intensities. So I think it's understanding that as well, because that will impact what type of modelling needs to be done at that initial stage. So yeah, I think it's that, just making sure there's sufficient information, evidence throughout that whole process. So if the team does change or there's a transfer, the process remains very smooth throughout that.
Thanks, Emily. And Jake, from you, any sort of important lessons learned from projects that you've worked on in recent months and years?
Yeah, I think from projects delivered, there's three key headings really, and I suppose the main one is challenging the client's brief. Often, especially as a contractor, when we're involved in a project, the client's brief is already done. You see a lot of them that can be generic, the copy and paste. So it's having the relationship with the client to be able to challenge that brief and guide them and educate them down the right path. I suppose with that as well comes reframing value engineering. Often, one of the biggest barriers to decarbonising our building stock is funding. Our clients don't have the capital. Often projects are already over budget at feasibility stage. So the first thing you do is you start value engineering. You start cutting. Actually, if you flip that on its head and start looking at sustainable engineering for a traditional project and looking at the whole life cycle model and cost of that. And I suppose with that comes the final point that I'm making with this. It's educating the decision makers. So there's key decision makers within a project, and sometimes we don't have the benefit of them, the whole project team being available and pulled together from day one. So as you say, it's educating the key decision makers and the people who are involved through that whole process to bring in the right people, ask the right questions, and understand the impacts of the decisions they're making.
Excellent stuff. And same question to you, Rob. Any sort of important lessons learned from your experience on the ground?
Yeah, very similar to what the guys have said, really. But I think that stakeholder piece and that briefing is really important. The briefing piece is, I think we probably often just think about the physically doing the do on site, but actually making sure we've got a really good run up and preparation for the bid application and the submission itself. Being aware of when that funding application portal opens, and making sure that there's early engagement with others to support, specialists to support you in that application process, so it's not a rush and there's a real clear review. Stakeholders are engaged early on, and they're aware from the moment that bid gets submitted what the intentions are. And I think having that key buy-in of stakeholders can have a real significant impact on delivering a successful project. Another point that I would raise would be around monitoring and reporting, which I think Emily's covered. Regularly monitoring and reporting on the progress and making sure that we're not falling short anywhere. And if we are, that we take corrective action at the right stage of the project before it's too late, to make sure that we do things in the right way, and that we achieve the savings that we've set out to at the start of the project.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much to the three of you. I'm not going to let you go just yet because we do have our audience Q&A to come with a few questions that have already come in from our audience online here. But to finalise the polls for the day, we're going to wrap up asking you the same question as we did at the start, and hopefully we'll see some improvement in knowledge. So how aware are you now of the decarbonisation process for public sector estates? We've got a rating scale of 1 to 4, 1 being not very aware, 4 being very aware, and this is where we find out how well the panel has done their job today in educating you. So another 5 seconds on that, please. Brilliant. So the good news is we've got nobody in that not being very aware section. So well done, panel, on doing that, and that's really good to see. that, again, quick maths, not necessarily my strong point, but around 80% of people are in that 3 to 4 awareness area, which is really good and great to see. Glad that we've managed to build some public sector knowledge there. So it's time to move on to our audience Q&A. So we've had a few come in already, and one that came in related to some of the challenges that are being faced when it comes to decarbonisation. It came from Peter Woodley, who mentioned all of the above challenges around funding and reticence to get going on it, but also around historic and listed buildings. Now, obviously, some of these estates, particularly within the public sector, can be quite old and can feature listed buildings. Jake, what are the particular challenges around decarbonising listed buildings in particular?
I think there's obvious challenges. You've a lot of elements on the building that can't be changed. But I think the key driver to achieving the decarbonisation of the historic building is engaging a conservation officer, really. And again, that comes down to understanding the project, the client's scope, the brief, the project needs, and the project team, and getting the right people engaged.
And Rob, from your experience within sort of particularly education side of things, a lot of very old and historic buildings there. What challenges do you kind of foresee there, and what do you see on a day to day?
Yeah, has a massive impact on what you can achieve and what you can deliver, as Jake says, and thinking about future maintenance, etc. A lot of anything you would do on a listed building, clearly would need to be reversible. So if they wanted to uncover or reclaim and salvage back to that original historic architectural features, they would need to be. But it will impact massively on the solutions you can implement. Emily and I are working currently on a school project where we're looking to introduce a heat pump, but with it being listed in the conservation area, there's no ability to install an air source heat pump. So we're now looking at ground source heat pumps. So therefore, that needs to be thought about early and engaged early, to make sure that in essence we've got a good plan there of, let's not put a bid in on the basis of what we want to do. Let's make sure that it's taking into account all of the facts, and being quite pragmatic and sensible with the solutions that we can put forward. But it is a challenge, and it will impact and limit the extent of the work you can do in some instances. So I think we just need to be aware of that when we embark on any decarb project.
Good stuff. One that came in from Francis Crick. We'll go to you on this one first, Emily. But again, it'd be interesting to hear any other thoughts that we have from the panel. Do the panel think that PAS 2038 is likely to become a requirement for PSDS future funding in a similar way that PAS 2035 is for social housing government funding?
I mean, there is potential, because it's a guidance that sets out that methodology, to like we were saying at the beginning, that sets out methodology that for everyone to follow across the industry, and it's got a holistic approach as well. So it is a potential, but unfortunately, it's unknown really. They could decide to do it or something similar, to help encourage that more holistic approach against it. But yeah, it all depends really. So.
Yeah. Anything in particular from yourself, Rob, on that one?
No, I think it's a bit of a cop out, but it's hard to say really. I think it depends so much on the way the government perhaps moves forward in initiatives and regulations, and how much focus there is really on legislative changes and policy updates. So I think all we can do is keep an eye on it, be aware of it, implement it where we can. It will come at a cost to have those individuals involved in projects and to implement those standards, because there's those defined roles that perhaps are over and above typical delivery partners and services. So I think it's just trying to keep abreast of it and be aware of changes in that legislative arena really.
Thank you both. Question in from Michelle Burrows, who has asked, how do you approach a large estate with multiple buildings of various conditions? Basically, a question of where do you start when you've got that kind of approach, rather than it being an individual building or two, whether it's a large estate with various buildings in different conditions. Jake, we'll go to you first on this one.
Yeah, I can understand why this is daunting for a lot of people. We've had customers that have building stock from single assets up to 500 plus. And I think when you look at the strategy of such a large scale, you almost need to try and eat the elephant at once, and say, right, well, looking at the building, again, it's understanding that what makes up that building stock in terms of portfolio. So you look at your highest energy uses for gas and electricity, but you're also factoring in, as we say, your asset management. So which are currently costing you the most in terms of your OPEX or your reactive maintenance and as such, because once you can start to target them improvements, then actually you're already on your pathway then and your easier wins, because that will generate you bigger savings. There's also multiple other things. So depending on what type of, it's difficult without knowing the context of the building stock, but if you look at a portfolio of schools, for example, there's a lot of strategies and technologies that can be implemented on a wide scale: LED lighting, solar PV, battery storage, things like that that show a high energy efficiency improvement, but also a very quick return of investment. So you actually, with a high building stock, you're almost at a slight advantage, because if you were to ring fence or put them energy savings into a bit of a green fund, you can actually then, when you understand your building stock, looking at your highest energy uses, in terms of gas, electricity, where the reactive maintenance is getting spent, you can then start to allocate some of that funds to decarbonise the rest of your building stock. So it's about understanding the whole building stock, putting it into a strategic program over a period of time, linking it to the asset management, but also factoring in them key wins in terms of energy efficiency and improvements, as we said.
And I guess with large estates in particular, there's an economy of scales type approach, isn't there? Where implementing one measure across a number of different places, different buildings, can kind of have that compounding effect of decarbonisation.
Yeah, definitely, and that's the strategy ultimately. And as we say, there's multiple ways of doing it.
I think, Tom, as well, it's important. I think, as Jake's just building on what Jake's just said, it's as he said, knowing the strategy, knowing the plan. If you've got works to do, it's almost not being led by the decarb, being led by the wider strategy of what you're doing. Then how can you enhance it with those decarbonisation factors? So, we've had clients with large stock who want to look at a PV program, for example, but the roofs, after our surveys, need to be replaced in the next 3, 4, 5 years. So actually, there's no benefit of installing solar panels on a roof that you have to take the panels back off of to replace the roof to put the panels back in 3, 4, 5 years. So trying to plan ahead. Well, okay, we know we've got a large scale roof program coming up in 5 years. What's our opportunity to maximize that and go above and beyond with the measures that we could implement? And there's options around that, certainly. But as Jake says, knowing what you've got and knowing how you can put a decarb slant onto that, I think is really important.
I guess that funding kind of falls into that as well, because it's that case of prioritizing the asset management strategy, and then the funding is almost a bonus on top of that, rather than it being what drives the strategy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think just to add to that, Tom, as well, when you look at your portfolio of assets or building stock, once you start to put it into some sort of program, over that be 15, 20, 25 year program linked to your asset management, you can start to implement on that program key milestone dates for funding opportunities, but linking it to the asset's end of life. So you're actually having a strategic approach to funding applications.
Sort of stuff. Emily, I'll come to you on this one. So just a question around early engagement and how that fits in with the procurement process. Obviously, we've talked a lot about early engagement and collaboration throughout this webinar. Does that tally with the challenges that the public sector faces in terms of quite long procurement routes at times? How can you sort of marry the two and make sure that you're still getting that early engagement while also making sure that you're compliant with procurement processes?
Yeah, that can be quite difficult, and really, oops, lights have just come back on, and it really comes down to timing, doesn't it? So yeah, it can be quite challenging to do that, but I think it's getting in early, doing all these assessments as early as you can to understand and setting out the client's brief so you're ready for the funding, to press that button and go ahead with that, so they go follow through with the procurement. So I think it's not waiting for it. It's like get ahead, like look at what you could do now and prepare. So it's all about preparation, I'd say.
Excellent. Got time for another question or two. One that's come in, and it's quite an interesting one actually. I've not thought about it in this way before, but a question has come in that should buildings be subject to the equivalent of an MOT as a car goes through, because the emissions from a building are in this question's view, it's the same principle as car emissions and making sure it's not going over a certain amount. So is that something that could be considered, whether that's an annual kind of report on these things, or sort of over 2 or 3 years? Is this something that already exists? I'll throw that one out as an open question to anybody because it seems like it's quite a broad one.
Yeah, I'd say, especially public buildings, they already have display energy certificate requirements that they
Hmm.
have to monitor and be assessed against that and see if they're performing any worse or better than the previous years. So they're already subject to them. But yeah, I think that would be quite an interesting method. But with the decarbonisation plan and electrification, and to go like the electricity grid to go towards net zero carbon, naturally you should be reducing CO2, but I think it should concentrate more the energy use. So how much energy you're using, because eventually, if we're all electric, we'll be towards that zero carbon anyway. But I think, yeah, energy use, I think that would be quite a good thing to do, to be honest.
Interesting. I've not really thought of it in the analogy of an MOT for cars as well. As well. Quite an interesting analogy there. Right. Well, we're just going to bring the final a question to sort of bring everything to a bit of a close here, and it's kind of related to the sort of 2030, 2035 targets that we've been talking about since the start of today's webinar. And I'll go down the screen and just get one kind of final thought from each of you on what is the one bit of advice you would give to those who are looking to decarbonize their estate ahead of those targets. Is there one thing that you can boil? Essentially, can you boil this hour long webinar down into one point, each of you? I'll let you go first on this one, Rob.
Uh, I think it's early preparation, early engagement, and defining your strategy. I'll leave it there.
And to you next, Jake.
I feel like Rob's just taken my initiative.
I'm
glad I went first.
I think I'll go slightly different with it, and I'll say progress over perfection, and that's not to be taken out of context. It's yeah, don't look for the perfect decarb strategy to do everything in one go. Just chip away. Think of the cost of doing nothing.
Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And to finish off, you please, Emily.
Yeah, I think like understanding your what's said at the beginning, understanding your building stock, the building users, how they use it, and then continuing that through, and making sure that you have that engagement at the end as well, so that everyone knows how to operate their buildings.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for your time today. That is unfortunately all we have time for. Thank you very much to those who attended. At various points, we had more than 100 people tuning in to hear the pearls of wisdom from our panel today. So really good stuff. And thank you for rejoining us in the new year. So now everybody that's attended today is part of the Pagabo Live community. You've now signed up for life, basically. So you'll all receive a link to our next session, which is coming up in February, details of which are on screen at the moment. There's also going to be a newsletter coming out around a week after each of our Pagabo Live sessions. That'll include a recording of the webinar in video and also podcast form. You can get it on Spotify and wherever you get your podcasts if you really, really want to listen to us in the car or on your smart speaker. And alongside those links, you'll also get further insights from the team and a written roundup of what's gone on today. So a really good thing to share around your organization. As I mentioned, we'll be back in February, Wednesday, the 19th from 3 till 4. We'll give you an update on what's going on with RAC at the minute and also LP PS. So hopefully you can join us then. And don't forget, Pagabo Live is now officially CPD accredited. You will receive a link from the team at the end of this event. So make sure you claim that credit to make sure you get your CPD hours in for your attendance today. That's everything from us. So thank you very much to you all for your attention, and hopefully we'll see you again next time. Thank you very much.